Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Hughes, and today I thought it would be fun to interview one of my favorite local composers. So give a nice welcome to Sarah Perske.
Hello there.
She is one of my friends and probably one of the composers I've worked with the longest. I think I've known you, you were my TA for sophomore music theory.
Yeah.
Don't ask her how I did, it was pretty bad. So yeah, she's written quite a few pieces that I played on, and I think 3 specifically by commission for me. So we're here just to kind of get insight into her mind and her process behind the composing of things. So first question is, when did you really start composing or kind of moving into this area of the music industry?
Well, when I was a kid, I always would just like make up songs and sing them on the swing set. So that was a thing. And kind of quit doing that for a while until I got into high school and learned how to play pop guitar, basically. And then I started doing the singer-songwriter thing. Kind of wanted to be Joni Mitchell and or the Beatles. Nice. Except that there was only one of me, so that was challenging.
Were you going to go for the haircut as well?
Maybe not so much the haircut. Maybe like later Beatles, you know, just like long, windswept. So yeah, and then like at the end of high school, I had to figure out something serious to do with my life. My parents were concerned about me.
That's real talk.
Yeah. And so the solution at the time seemed to be to try to become a classical musician, essentially. And I didn't read music at that point, so I had to go to my guitar teacher, because I'd been studying with a guitar teacher for about 4 years who had been trying to get me to learn to read music, and I'd be like, oh no, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, I just want to play chords and like write my own songs and do this stuff. And so finally, like toward the end of high school, I like went to her and I was like, I need to learn how to become a classical guitarist like now. And obviously that doesn't happen overnight. So basically, like with her, I just kind of like learned to read, learned a few basics, and then came to DU as an English major. And started taking guitar lessons with one of the GTAs here, Patrick Sutton, who was great.
Yes, he is.
And eventually was able to audition into the guitar program here, like at the end of my freshman year. And yeah, so it was tough. And then at that same time, my mother kept bugging me and saying, well, why aren't you getting involved in the composition department? Because that's what you really do, is like write stuff. And I was resistant to that for a while too, because I felt like, oh, that's serious music. Like, I don't know if I can do that. But one of the first things I did as a freshman was attend a playground concert. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Playground is kind of like the main new music ensemble here in Denver. And it was wild, of course. And I was really excited because my pop songs had always been like a little unconventional, to the point where people in my little homeschool group were kind of like, what are you going for exactly? Like, we don't know what this is. And my mom would say, yeah, like, I gotta hear one of your songs like 3 times before I like it, but then I really like it. It's like, it'd take a while. It's like, why are there tritones in that harmony? Like,
it's devil music.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I saw this Playground concert and was like, wow, classical composers can do anything and no one questions them. This is great. So yeah, so that got the wheels turning. And then I started taking lessons with Bill, because back then, with Bill Hill, back then non-majors could take lessons with him, and he was awesome and really encouraging. And Chris Malloy was awesome and really encouraging. And later Leanna Kirchhoff when she came on board. So yeah, that's kind of how that happened.
So you started your undergrad in college as an English major, switched it while still in undergrad to a guitar performance major, and then you ended up getting a master's in composition?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. I had no idea that you started as an English major.
Yeah, and that was really, I thought creative writing would be like a good thing to do since I was into the singer-songwriter thing, and that was useful for sure, but it's pretty dark. Like, it's a pretty dark world. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to be spending all my time in that very dark, like, interior place.
Yeah. So when you made the switch to being a classical composer, did you find yourself still doing any singer-songwriter type material, or did that kind of get put on the back burner when you tried to?
To some extent, it got put on the back burner. I would say I was a closet singer-songwriter at that point.
Is that frowned upon in the composition circles?
Maybe not explicitly, but like there was a little bit of a feeling that like it definitely wasn't the kind of thing I was writing in composition lessons.
Right.
And like just by my own choice, like I was trying to write things like what I heard the Playground Ensemble play, you know, what I thought serious classical music sounded like. And yeah, I did kind of get the sense from my teachers that was their focus, was that kind of thing, and not the singer-songwriter kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I would just be like in my dorm room with the door closed, continuing to write singer-songwriter stuff.
So, and then do you feel like, aside from the singer-songwriter material, do you feel like your music has changed since finishing your graduate work in terms of whether it's writing style, instrumentation, or just general material?
Yes and no. I feel like there are some things that kind of stay the same, like even like from the very beginning of undergrad when I first started taking lessons, like some of the same sounds that I'm still into.
Yes, you still are a fan of the tritone, aren't you?
Yeah. And I feel like I've always kind of tried to walk that line between things that are more experimental and things that are more accessible, to try to get something that people will be excited about and maybe like not fully understand, or maybe like be a little weirded out about, but like still like enough that they can kind of grab onto.
Right.
No matter who they are. I do feel like I've, especially lately, started to go back to the pop roots a little bit more. Like with the piece, I'm working on a solo guitar piece for Russ Callison that's based on Dante's Purgatorio. And like that has ended up being like very sort of pop rock influenced. Okay. Like almost unintentionally. Because a lot of it was just trying to find cool extended techniques. And I think that's also kind of Russ and his personality and like his playing style and some of the things that he was showing me for techniques that he was into and interested in trying in this piece. So I sort of felt like that was a license for me to go there with this. But yeah, there's also like the full spectrum of different styles, I think, in this piece too. Yeah.
And do you find, what would you say is your compositional method or the progression that you take when writing a piece? Or what is your process? That's the word I'm looking for, process.
Yeah, process. It depends a lot on the piece, for sure. I tend to do a lot of recording these days. Okay. Like recording myself improvising on the guitar if it's a guitar piece, on the piano if it's a piece for anything else. And yeah, because I feel like there's sort of an immediate vision that you can get that way that's sometimes gets lost if you're just trying to kind of like note by note write things down. And that's like a big struggle I've had too, like as a student composer, of just like getting things on paper, damn it, you know? Because I'd go into lessons every week. It's like, well, I've written another measure, but I spent like 30 hours this week working on this piece.
Well, and it's so great recording because you can, it helps you almost put yourself back in the same mindset, or if you're looking for a certain emotion that you're working on. Yeah. I feel like having that recording, for me at least, really helps me put myself back in that mindset.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, so good old iPhone.
Good old iPhone
is
recordings.
My friend. Yeah.
So then, you know, recording it and then writing it, and then after the piece is mostly written, is there anything else that goes on? Whether it's revisions, do you like to revise it, then give it to the players, have the players play it for you, revise it as that happens? What's your almost post-production, quote unquote?
Yeah, well, like even during the process, there's usually a fair amount of collaboration, as you know. Like with the piece with Russ, I've been sending him stuff as I've been finishing it, and then we've been meeting up to work on things, change a lot of things a lot of the time. Actually, I don't think we've changed too much in this piece yet, but like there's been a lot of workshopping and like just jamming and idea generating kind of thing.
Is that something you find when you go to collaborate with a musician and like you bring certain sections or whatnot? Do you find that more often than not, once you actually get it into the player's hands, that there are a lot of changes? Or have you found throughout your career that usually the piece stays relatively the same?
I want to say that it stays relatively the same. So often I find that however I notated it is not the piece.
Okay.
That there's some things that get lost in translation that I have to like explain or demonstrate. And that's just one of the failings of notated music, I think. And I'm getting better at it too. I think we're all learning all the time with notation. And
well, I think that's one of my favorite aspects of like new music or working with new composers is that, you know, if you do something like a composer that's dead, you can't really ask them. I mean, you can go to like resources and research to try and get the best idea of what they want from the music, but with an actual live composer right in front of you, you can ask them for that more specific and detailed information.
Right.
Which I think leads to better performances.
Yeah, it's true. And more too, I'm realizing that if a performer wants to do something differently, like 9 times out of 10, they're right. Like that's the way to make the piece better. So yeah, there's that too.
So speaking of composers that have kicked the proverbial bucket, you know, in music school, we often, you know, we learn about, you know, all the greats or the classics, you know, Bach, Mozart, Haydn, yada, 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 the list goes on and on. Do you feel that, in my personal opinion, I think there's a very strong lack of women composers that's involved in music education when looking at the sort of quote-unquote great composers. Do you feel like that's doing a disservice to composers, especially women composers, that they only really get to learn about men and their compositions in history?
Yeah, I do think so. And of course, the difficulty, I think, a lot of the time is that the teachers or the textbook writers don't always have access to appropriate musical examples written by women. And they're out there. Like there's a site that I'm not going to get the name of it right. I want to say it's called musictheoryexamplesbywomen.com or something like that, where someone has actually like made it their work to go through and find music theory examples by women that demonstrate all of the concepts that you need to learn as an undergraduate student or whatever. And so, yeah, I think I'd like to see more of that kind of thing happening, and I think it probably will as time goes on. But yeah, there's just been a history of women being discouraged from composing, I think. Just going back to Clara Schumann, and much earlier. And it is tough, I think, if you're a woman in music and you're kind of looking around and seeing a lot of men succeeding in the field and maybe not always as many women succeeding in the field. But 3 women were the top 3 Pulitzer Prize winners this year. So
brilliant.
That's great. One of them was Kate Soper. I don't know if you know her stuff.
The name's familiar, but I don't
she
know. She
plays with Wet Ink.
Okay.
So you've maybe seen stuff that I've like reposted and been like,
Sweet.
this is awesome. So yeah, I think the tide is turning.
Good. And do you think, putting it back into kind of the more modern view of it, do you think that it's harder for women to be composers, whether it's, you know, classical or modern or whatever have you? Do you think in this aspect of the music industry, do you think it's harder for women to succeed?
I think it can be. I think a lot depends on like the people and organizations that you're dealing with and working with. I definitely have gotten the sense from talking to other women composers who are maybe at a like slightly later career stage than me that it's a great idea to use a male pseudonym if you're submitting to a competition that isn't blind, because you may very well get different results than if you submitted with your own name.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I do sort of,
heard that.
Yeah, I do feel like there is still some of that kind of thing. On the other side of that, though, I feel like people who are in new music in general tend not to have those attitudes, tend to be more inclusive in their thinking.
All the extended techniques you guys are doing, yeah, you'd have to be.
You'd have to be. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it is somewhat harder. Just the way it's probably harder to be a woman in any industry, too. That there are things that women have to deal with, like forms of discrimination that men typically don't.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that your career has taken a different path than you anticipated it taking?
Maybe. I never had a clear idea of what path my career was going to take, and I've kind of gone back and forth between a lot of different things. Like when I started grad school in composition, I was thinking, okay, academia, like gonna learn how to be a professor and teach composition, and like that's still a thing that I think about, that I think I really would like to teach composition at some point. But then lately I've kind of been like, well, you know what? All I really want to do is be a singer-songwriter and like screw everything else. And then of course I'm working in the music library. I'm a librarian now too. And that's also been really great because like there's a tendency with me, I think, to just want to be a perpetual student and just like read all of the books and learn all of the things and like never graduate, except that I had to graduate because it's too expensive to never graduate. So yeah, that's like another thing that I love, is just being a librarian and being able to help people with their research and with finding resources and stuff.
Great. So speaking of kind of, now you just want to be a singer-songwriter, so you're currently working on 2 pieces, or you've written them, that are in that more singer-songwriter style. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Just to wrap up the career thing, though, I feel like it's kind of a normal thing for millennials these days to be sort of perpetually figuring out the career and maybe be doing 3 different things at once and changing a lot. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that too. But yeah, the singer-songwriter type songs that I'm going to be performing with Nebula Ensemble on the 28th of October with Kyle.
With me?
What to say about that? It's a Pops concert, and so that kind of, again, gave me a license to be able to pull out of the closet and dust off some of the songs that I was writing in my dorm room with the door shut. As an undergraduate.
As I remember you saying, you wrote these quite a few years ago.
One of them, I think I must have been a sophomore. The other one, Cadmon, is a little more recent. I think I had kind of just finished undergrad when I wrote that one. So yeah, it's kind of opening up a whole new horizon for me. Like, I feel like these are pretty much straight up just pop songs or folk rock songs, depending on how specific you want to get.
Aspect of it,
yeah.
So how much do you think of the piece right now? Because right now the pieces are set for classical guitar, vocals, various percussion, in either a second guitar, or is it electric bass for both of them?
Electric bass on one of them,
and
2 guitars
on the other one. How do the pieces look now compared to when you initially wrote them? How much has changed since you took them out of the closet?
Quite a lot. Consecrate, I'm just struggling to even remember what the original guitar accompaniment was. I think it was probably just chords, like your basic chords.
Right, yeah.
And then at some point, like, I did start playing with it more and trying to find interesting finger picking patterns, and then the harmonics thing that Zach plays. And then for practical reasons, since I didn't want to play that guitar part, because there's a lot of harmonics, and then I'm singing high notes at the same time that I'm trying to like.
It would be a bit hard to do that, but yeah.
Yeah. So then I needed to devise another guitar part because I'm a little more comfortable singing and playing than just singing or just playing, and so yeah, that was all new. The part that I play with that with the guitar in drop D tuning.
Sweet. Now, as she mentioned, she's performing on these too. Now, what are your thoughts on composers and still being up to snuff on their instrument, or even still just performing on their instrument? Do you feel like composers still need to be performing on their instrument, or is it okay just to have those skills and that knowledge behind you?
I think it really depends on the person. One thing I've talked to one of my teachers about is that there does seem to be a correlation between being a really, really top-notch performer and being a really, really top-notch composer. It seems like some of the best composers out there are also just really good at performing.
Really good at performing.
Not always true, but often. And I've always felt a little insecure about that, honestly, because I've never been like the best classical guitarist in the program, like by a long shot. No, I was the kid who like learned how to read music their freshman year of college and was like, "Hey guys, can I play guitar?" So not so much. And I feel like I know other composers who are really, really excellent at composing who also aren't as good at classical music performance. Like maybe they're better at improv, like maybe they're better with electronic music, that kind of thing. So I do think that things are evolving a bit, and that you don't necessarily have to be in that classical music box as a performer to be a good composer or have some kind of performance experience that will help you in that.
Sweet. Now, the hard question might be, do you have a piece or a song, since you are a singer-songwriter too, that you are the most proud of or that you still love the most out of the very long list of compositions that you have? Is there one that stands out?
That's really hard. There are a few, like towards the end of my grad school work that I really liked. One was Stella Maris, which
sounded so good.
And Reconstructing Apoptosis, which you played on.
It's a hard piece.
Really hard piece. What else? My favorite piece is always the piece that I'm working on at the moment, it seems like.
Good mentality to have, I think.
And I'm always dissatisfied, like with every piece. I sort of feel like, well, the basic idea is there, but I didn't really have time to like polish it up and make it absolutely perfect in all of these like small ways. So there's that too. Like I feel like Stella Maris and Reconstructing Apoptosis are both imperfect. In part because of difficulty. Like, does it really need to be that hard? Probably not. So that's another thing that I've been thinking about since I graduated is like, how can we make this easier on the players?
Right. And do you have any advice or things that you'd recommend for composers our age and our generation or younger on how to kind of deal with or handle any disappointment that you might have in pieces? Because, you know, as they say, you're your toughest critic, but we've both composed, and I think we both agree that you're never ever quite perfectly happy with a piece. So how do you deal with that?
Probably not in the best way. I've had a tendency to want to go back and like keep revising things eternally, and probably one of the most helpful things is when my composition teacher many times was like, no. Like, you can work out that problem in the next piece. So, like, the attitude that each piece is a chance to learn something and to grow. And I think it's helpful to listen to a lot of the established composers out there, including dead people, because you'll see that there are some inconsistencies in quality, maybe times where they were trying to be more experimental and may or may not have succeeded. I get this sense with some of Messiaen's work, honestly. Like, I'm a huge fan, but there are certain pieces that I'm like, okay, like, I like this piece. This is a good piece. This isn't as good as this other piece that he wrote like 10 years earlier, or a piece that he wrote like 2 years after that. And it's kind of clear that, like, you know, he was writing to this commission and was trying to experiment with these ideas, and he learned some things in that, you know, in a later piece were maybe more successful than they were in that piece.
Right.
So I think you have to treat it as a process and not be too hard on yourself.
Not be too hard on yourself. And do you think it's true that all composers develop a kind of style or something that you hear it and you just recognize, that's Messiaen, or that's Sarah Perske? As a performer for her, I can say she does have a definite style.
I don't know if it's true of all composers. I think it's true of many. Yeah, and I think there are like some different schools of thought on that. Like, I've encountered the idea that every piece should be totally different.
Mm.
And some composers, I think, are really into that, wanting each piece to be a totally different sound world that you can't necessarily tell it's the same person.
Right.
I've always kind of been into, like, each piece kind of follows on the previous one, of exploring some of the same ideas, maybe trying to do some things better than I did in the last one.
Mm.
And that's something I've talked to my teachers about in grad school, where they're like, you know, it really is okay to, like, keep exploring the same idea. Like, there might be some people who will be critical of that, but then there will be other people who think that that's the way to go.
Right. I suppose, do you ever want to write a piece in a completely different style than what you often do, or that you find your pieces often have these certain qualities? Do you ever just want to absolutely just, like, scrap that all away and try something completely different?
Sometimes. I always tend to feel like the piece is in control a lot of the time. That there might be, like, a lot of ideas that I have and try that end up falling by the wayside because they don't work. But ultimately, the piece kind of does what it wants to do, and I'm just along for the ride to some extent. And yeah, so I've never really been in the position of wanting to do something completely different from what I was doing and feeling like I had to still do that thing. I have had comments from people from time to time where they've said, well, that piece was completely different from anything else you've ever written. Like, I could still tell it was you, but it was totally different. Like, was that intentional? And the answer is no. Like, that's just what happened.
Right.
Trying to think of other things.
Do you like that when people tell you that, or is that how do you feel about that?
It's very interesting. I guess it tells me that self-perception is faulty.
Yes.
Extremely faulty. So I feel fine about that. I guess in some ways it's kind of encouraging, because it's like, okay, I guess I'm not a one-trick pony. I can do what the piece needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can dig that. You're so right about self-perception.
Oh man.
Speaking of self-perception, was there ever a moment when you had that, like, oh, I guess I am a real composer now? Or how do you go about trying not to compare yourself to other composers? And, like, how do you feel that your music is real music?
Those are great questions.
Like, we're gonna answer that another time.
First of all, I've had a lot of teachers who have worked really, really hard to try to get me to have some self-esteem. And that's been great. In the guitar department, Ricardo Isnaola and Jonathan Leithwood both, like, bent over backwards to just, like, tell me that I'm a valid human being, basically. Yeah, I remember Ricardo a few times saying, you know, you're not a second-class citizen. Like, don't play like you think you are one, because you're not. Like, you deserve to be up here. And same with Chris Malloy. Like, I think it's kind of a bit of a soapbox of his, that he's a feminist and kind of sees some of the problems in the fields with it being male-dominated and not always that easy for women to be successful for that reason.
Right.
And so, yeah, like, for years, he's been, like, you know, my cheerleader for
he's really good at it, too. I enjoy him.
Yeah, and Leanna and Bill as well with that. So I guess the first time I sort of realized that maybe I was a real composer was when I won the Playground's student competition, because they used to be in residence at the Lamont School of Music. And every year there would be this student competition. There would be a call for scores, so they would play pretty much everything that got submitted and then choose one piece that was the winner, and then that composer could write a commission piece for them. And this was, like, a very humbling experience too, because I submitted two pieces, one that I thought was great and really wanted to get performed by the Playground because the recording I had of it wasn't that great, and one that I thought was pretty good, but, you know, I didn't really need another recording of it because I had a great recording of it.
Right.
And then they chose the one that I didn't need the recording of. But they didn't tell me that I had won. And so I was writing to poor Richard, and being like, can we change it? And I don't know if they had to like delay the announcement or something, but like he couldn't tell me like just yet that was the deal, but was like, we can't change it. And I was like, I can't believe this. Like, why can't I get a good recording of this other piece? And then found out that I had won that. So like back to self-perception, like the piece that I thought was great was not the piece that they thought was great. And I think they were right. Like,
now looking back at it.
Now looking back at it, and I am not at all sorry that I don't have a better recording of that other piece. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. Shifting gears a little bit, do you have any favorite instruments that you like to either A, write for, or B, just work with those kind of performers going? Because yes, there are stereotypical performers. I am sorry, it is true. String players will be string players, same with percussionists and brass and everyone. But do you have favorite instruments you like writing for?
Yeah, I do. I think my favorite instruments always tend to be the ones that I've gotten the most familiar with. So almost anything could become my favorite instrument.
You could be next.
Yeah, like I'm very partial to clarinet just because I've written a lot of clarinet music, or a lot of music with clarinet. Obsessed with percussion, I think just because everyone is obsessed with percussion.
That is the only correct answer. Let me tell you right now.
Yeah.
Do you write a lot of guitar music since you are a classically trained guitarist?
Not as much as I probably could have. Like this is only the 4th solo guitar piece I've written that I'm working on for Russ right now. And the first 2 I wrote for myself that were kind of like easier-ish things. Only they ended up not being easy at all, and I couldn't play them and had to get Laura Husbands to play one of them for me. So
oh my God.
There's that too.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah, I did feel like part of my training here that I was really encouraged to write for a wide variety of instruments and not just my instrument, and make sure that I was comfortable with all of the instrument families. Right. Brass is the thing I've really neglected, I have to say. Also double reed instruments. So yeah, those are 2 I'd like to get more familiar with.
Right. Now, just beat me to my next question. I was going to ask if you had any instruments that you were really hoping to write for. Are you hoping to write for double reed and brass instruments, or are you still hoping to neglect them for a little bit longer?
I don't really want to neglect them. Like, I think I'd love to write an oboe piece. I'd love to write a bassoon piece.
I'm writing a piece for a bassoon in a part of a trio right now. It's fun.
Yeah. That's so great. Other things that I'd really, really like to write for, though, I'm trying to think.
Done it all, seen it all.
Yeah, I guess there isn't anything that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I really, really want to write a flugelhorn piece, whatever. Right,
yeah. How do you go about choosing your instrumentation for your pieces? Is it often whatever the source material, you'll kind of frame it in that regards, or do you often pick instruments and then go from there? Or neither?
Sometimes both, sometimes neither. I guess a lot of times it's just who's asking me to write, or what instruments are available to me in the particular ensemble.
I suppose that question was probably framed in the aspect of writing pieces for yourself, not for work. Sorry.
Right. But yeah, like with Nebula Ensemble, there's a certain amount of choice. Usually, like depending on what
the roster of people who are here.
Depending on what our roster of people consists of, like which instruments. So yeah, sometimes I'll pick, like this year, I think I picked my instrumentation based on like some things that I really enjoy writing for, and just kind of like my default of like, okay, if I'm going to write it for a larger ensemble, I want strings, and I want guitar, and I want percussion.
Yeah, you do.
And then there were other things that I was like, well, I really haven't gotten to work with this person that much, and I really like their playing, so I'm going to be sure to ask for them. And then, of course, there's still other people that I haven't gotten to work with yet and want to, but I can't ask for the entire ensemble all at once. So yeah, like sometimes it's like, who do I want to work with, or like what instrument have I not gotten to write for as much, and sometimes it's like the old standbys of like, I really want to write for Kyle again.
He's great. Speaking in kind of that manner, Do you have a preference for writing for size of ensemble? You like chamber work, solo stuff, orchestra?
That again, I think depends on the piece. Like orchestra is definitely a big time commitment.
Yeah, it is.
And it's pretty stressful a lot of the time. But yeah, like I've enjoyed writing for like larger chamber ensembles and also smaller chamber ensembles. Like I like having more possibilities that you get with more forces, like more notes essentially, if you have more people.
Yes.
Than if you just have a trio. So yeah, I don't think I really have a preference. It just sort of depends on the piece and what it's supposed to be doing.
So then, flipping it in another direction because I can't keep a straight conversation going in one continuous, well-formed direction. You'd mentioned earlier that part of the reason why you like working in the library is you like helping direct people to resources and text and materials. For your pieces, unless a commission is asking for it to be based on a specific topic or story or whatever, what do you like to use for source material when it comes to writing a piece? Is there always source material, whether that's historically, fictionally, whatever, or a mathematical formula that you like to just base pieces on?
I'm trying to think back on everything I've done recently.
The entire span of
I've
your
done
career.
a lot of pieces recently that are, I guess, somewhat programmatic, like Yggdrasil Highway, which I still don't know how to pronounce, even though
Yggdrasil.
Yggdrasil.
Yggdrasil, yeah.
Yeah. Norse mythology. So yeah, that one, and the piece I wrote for the Keith Larson duo. It's really difficult to say what the program is, but there is one because they're acting, and it's essentially about a man and his doppelganger and trying to escape from his doppelganger. And but then like Stella Maris, I didn't have an idea with that one. I was just exploring a sound world basically initially. And as I was doing that, it reminded me of the contour of Ave Maris Stella. And then I was like, oh, I can totally work in the chant tune, and it can be all about that. And it fit because like it was all based on the low Ds, and I associate D with the color blue, which is a Marian color.
Interesting.
So it all just kind of like came together. So like sometimes the title and the program come after like a significant amount of material is written, and sometimes it's the other way around. Like with the piece that I'm writing for Russ, the piece that's based on Dante's Purgatorio, initially Russ came to me and wanted a piece about the 7 deadly sins. And so we were kind of working with that idea until he was like, you know, there's too much negativity in the world. Like, maybe it could be about more, like, overcoming the 7 deadly sins. And then it's like, okay, well, we might as well just use Dante because he already came up with the structure and the order.
Yeah.
So then it was just like, great, I've got an excuse to read medieval literature. Like, this is awesome. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take us down another tangential alley. Tell me more about this note with color association you've got going on.
The note with color association.
Also because I'm just really curious because I've never heard you talk about this before.
Yeah, I do have pitch color associations. I guess it might be considered synesthesia in a textbook sense, but not the kind of musical synesthesia that people like Messiaen had, where they actually have perfect pitch and they associate a sound with a color. I don't have perfect pitch. So with me, it's always been note letter names that have really clear color associations, which gets very weird and confusing because D sharp and E flat are the same note. But the spelling, like the way it's spelled, has different color associations for me. And so that can get difficult if I spell it a certain way, you know, as I'm sketching. And then it's like, well, no, really, like this needs to be respelled for ease of reading or like just to be correct. You know?
Just
to not have like weird augmented intervals that they have to read. And then I'm like, but then it's not the right color anymore, you know? So yeah, there is. Yeah.
Have you ever written music based almost solely on that aspect of that you have an experience with, or?
Yeah, it definitely influences a lot of the decisions I make. like the instruments also influence a lot of those decisions, but like I tend to write music that does have somewhat of a tonal center. So when I'm choosing that, sometimes I'll be thinking about things like, well, the last two pieces were blue. How about yellow this time? Or like I have a cello, therefore like either the piece has to be sort of pinkish red, or, you know, if that's my lowest instrument and I want the low C to like be the tonal center, or I need to like find another way to approach that. And also just like choosing pitch collections. Like I tend to go for pitch collections that seem colorful to me, to like have a lot of colors. And maybe like one predominant color, but like colorful overall, like not monochromatic.
Sweet.
So
that's so bloody interesting. Okay. So we can talk about that over coffee sometime. So then to kind of gear it in towards the wrapping up section, do you have any projects? We know right now that you're working on a piece for Russ about overcoming hell, 7 Deadly Sins, and all the dark, slightly not dark stuff about it. And you've written 2 pieces for Nebula that are singer-songwriter. Do you have any projects coming up, either that you're currently working on or that you're going to start working on that you're really excited about?
Those were the main ones that I wanted to hit. I have a marimba concerto in the works for this gentleman.
Yes, details not to be entirely announced yet, but we have started talking about commissioning a marimba concerto, which it's always interesting because I don't really like percussion concertos, which is odd. I love so many concertos out there, but percussion concertos are really hit and miss with me. So I'm just gonna have you write one that I really like. So,
yes, it'll be good.
It'll be great.
You'll like it.
yes, I will.
So there's that. I've also just been thinking a lot about how to maybe integrate the singer-songwriter and the serious composer a little more. Because I sort of feel like I have 2 identities and maybe they need to come together a little bit more. So I'm thinking towards the spring Nebula Ensemble Festival and wondering, okay, can I take my classical instrumentation that I've been assigned for that and write something that has a little more in common maybe with these singer-songwriter tunes, or can I combine those in some way that's compelling? And like the weird idea that came to me was, what if Spectralists crashed a second Viennese school jazz nightclub?
I'll just work that in my head. Interesting.
So that's like kind of the idea that's floating around in my head right now, is like, could I be like singing kind of singer-songwriter-y things like with this ensemble and have it be like a little bit second Viennese school and a little bit spectral and like a little bit jazz. So
I'm interested and terrified at the end. Entirely same time. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be fun. And then last question, as always, would you have any advice or recommendations you would give to composers starting out in their career now, or kind of just dipping their toes into the industry where it's at now?
Maybe 2 things. Listen to everything. You hear that a lot, but it can be really hard to find the time when you're in school to listen to stuff.
That's true.
And also, don't limit yourself either to just listening to things that you should be listening to, because I did that a lot in undergrad, and be like, I should be listening to serious music, and kind of disconnecting from like the other kinds of music that I liked. So I don't think you should do that. I also don't think you should just stay in whatever your musical comfort zone is with your listening. Like I think there needs to be some balance there, and that you need to take listening seriously. But not too seriously, because it still has to be fun. And then the other thing has gone out of my head. So listening, improvising. I think it's really, really important that you can kind of get into the mindset of like, okay, I need to sit down and get some music written. And that works for some people. But you can also end up with writer's block and end up hating what you're doing.
Oh my God, that's so real.
Yeah, so I think it's important to like keep the play in music, like the sense of playfulness and fun and discovery. Even though you can feel like you're just goofing off and like you're not getting anything done, like give yourself that time and like don't beat up on yourself and be like, oh, I just spent 2 hours goofing around at the piano. Like, no, that's your job. Like, you need to goof around at the piano or the guitar.
Perfect job
or the
description.
marimba. Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely do that.
Yeah, so those are the two things.
Groovy. Well, everyone, this has been Sarah Perske. Look in the information section and I'll include some links to her work. And as we mentioned, if you're in Denver, come out to the University of Denver next Saturday, October 28th. 7:30 p.m. for the Nebula Ensembles first concert of the year, and you'll be able to see 2 of her pieces. So yeah, let me know in the comments below whether or not you like kind of this interview style or even just talking about composition with other people. I've got loads of composers that I can bring in here and talk to about. So yeah, either way, stay tuned for the next one. Stay groovy.